This episode is brought to you by our Patreon members.
Join our growing community for early access to every episode, exclusive video versions of the podcast, behind-the-scenes footage, full-length product demos, and more. We appreciate you. Welcome back to Martins and More. My name's Maury Rutch, and I'm here with Martin Insider Spoon Phillips from One Man's Guitar. What's happening, Spoon?
Hey, Maury. It's always great to be back for another exciting podcast. This one's particularly exciting as we have a special guest who is always delightful to hear when he's playing guitar, but this will be the first time I've had a conversation with him, so that's very exciting.
Would you happen to be talking about Eric Skye?
I would indeed.
Yeah.
Hey, guys.
He's in the building!
How are you?
Eric, thank you so much for taking the time, man.
Yeah, man.
What's happening?
Hey, it's a beautiful, sunny, very cold day in the Pacific Northwest, and, I'm talking to you guys.
That only proves you're not with us in Pennsylvania, because it is not beautiful. It is freezing. It's cloudy. it's the whole, the 70 days of January are finally over, but it's still cold around here. So.
Yes, all the rest have 31 except for January, which has 70, and February, which has 90. In New York City, anyway. Welcome. Very exciting. Eric is Portland-based, Pacific Northwest guitarist, and has played with a whole bunch of very interesting people. He's very into collaboration and solo exploration. And I noticed that you're often introduced or mentioned as being a jazz guitar player, but in recent years you've explored some more traditional Americana milieu and genres. So very curious to hear if you can give us some background of where you're coming from and where you've been recently.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I guess I'd like to say I'm an acoustic guitar player, and that encompasses jazz and blues and fingerstyle and flatpicking and fiddle tunes, and it's all kind of one thing for me. But yeah, I probably have more of a history of being in the jazz bin at the figurative music stores, record stores. Remember those? But yeah, in recent years, it's a little bit more flat picking. But yeah, I've been all over the place. I've been pretty eclectic. Let's see. So life story. Let's see if I can condense this down. Well, I was born in Pennsylvania, in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, in the mid 1960s, and LBJ was president. And started playing at about 7 or 8 years old when I got a guitar for Christmas. Actually, my sister did too. I kind of took over both pretty quickly, and was self-taught. I have no early memories because my parents weren't musicians, so I have no early memories about how it came to be. I think I can sort of remember my mother getting a chord book and occasionally seeing maybe Roy Clark pop up on Hee Haw or something,
Yeah.
And just sort of slowly figure things out, I mean, that's just the way it was done back in the day. Right. So, then around, I guess I'm going into middle school about 1979, and my dad takes a job in the Silicon Valley, and we moved from Bucks County, Pennsylvania to Cupertino, California. And major culture shock,
Okay.
Sidewalks. Whoa. Because I lived in New Hope, which is at least at that time, I imagine it still is very sort of historic and bucolic kind of country area, or we lived outside of town or whatever. So then to live in suburban Silicon Valley was kind of a culture shock. But that's when I first got a guitar teacher and started playing classical guitar, because that's the only thing my father would pay for guitar lessons. Everything else was bullshit to him. If I played electric guitar in the house, he would always, just say, what is that horse shit? So yeah, so I studied classical guitar against my will for a while, around seventh and eighth grade, and then a little bit of electric guitar on my own. My sister dated a series of guitar players. She's about 7 or 8 years older than I am, and I still to this day like to say that she's a huge influence on me, even though she's not a musician. Just because I think when I was a kid, like in the early 70s, having a teenage sister was huge. Like just to go into a room and kind of move the beads aside and sit on the beanbag chair when she wasn't there and go through her vinyl collection and find all those great records. I think if, otherwise I might have like listened to the Bay City Rollers all day or something, but so that was really helpful. And then later, like I said, she started dating all these guitar players. And I remember at one point, this guy actually left his Stratocaster at the house and they had broken up. And he said, well, you just take it. You're more into it than I am. It was like this great, I don't know exactly what year it is, but it was like a late 60s kind of Stratocaster or whatever. And I just sort of took over that guitar for a while. But fun fact, I decided I wanted to play a 12 string. I'm like 13 years old, so I go into the music store and I see this, what I now know was probably a horrible, cheap Yamaha 12 string with this beautiful Stratocaster. I'm like, excuse me, sir, do you think there's any way I could trade this for that? So anyway, I did that. So I had a great guitar teacher at that time, and I was just really fortunate. He knew I wasn't really into the classical thing, but I kind of went down that road for a little while, and I'm sort of glad I did. I never became, remotely good classical player, but he also was pretty eclectic himself and kind of got me into jazz and stuff and turned me on to some good records like Kenny Burrell, Wes Montgomery, and just, all the kind of bluesy jazz guys. And at that time in the Bay Area, you could drive out to Palo Alto and see like Will Ackerman or Alex DeGrassi or even Michael Hedges like playing around,
Wow.
So I was kind of very adjacent and very interested in that kind of, I think of it as like the California guitar style or the sort of new acoustic, I think is what people were calling it then. And so that was kind of interesting to me too. And that's when I really sort of fell in love with the steel string. I had I think in about 8th grade or 9th grade, maybe, my best friend's mother was kind of the hippie mother I always wanted. And she gave me a cassette tape that had the first 2 Alex DeGrassi records on it. And I remember listening to that, possibly under the influence, I don't know, with headphones on one night. And it just completely rewired my brain. To this day, I can just viscerally remember, just neuroplasty happening, just hearing him play, which was really great. And I think that's where the whole steel string thing kind of came into focus, and solo guitar musics, classical kind of sets you up for understanding that you can play kind of by yourself and have a melody and bass and all of that kind of happening at the same time. But I think what like Alex was doing in particular, it sounded like California to me, sounded like the Redwoods. It was very, very influential. So that puts us about 1982.
Yeah, I kind of had my epiphany was the early Leo Kottke stuff, the Mudlark album, and hearing him do box beret and things like that on a steel string. But do you recall what your first 6-string acoustic was?
Yeah, the very first one that I said earlier, my grandmother gave us each guitars for Christmas, and I was so little, like I think I was like 7 or possibly even younger. I should probably talk to my sister about this, but it was like a Sears and Roebuck kind of almost more of a toy kind of archtop looking thing. But my sister also got like a Sears and Roebuck like classical guitar, and I don't think she was interested. So I sort of took over her classical guitar. So I played that nylon. I remember the top was coming off and I had to tape it down for a couple of years there.
I was going to say, after your Degrassi epiphany, when you really were already a guitar player, what was your first,
I was playing that Yamaha 12 string. There were times when I took off 6 of the strings and I had a 6th string, and it turns out you can do
Ah,
that. And fun fact, that can give you a wider string spacing. I played that
sure.
for a long time. I had a hippie girlfriend who painted this whole giant dragon painting on top of it with thick oil paint, so it didn't sound so good after that. But yeah, I played that guitar for a long time. And I did have that electric guitar. And I think I was already thinking about music that sounded good solo, kind of solo fingerstyle or maybe even pick style. Because remember, I was sort of like, I had one foot in the jazz world too. And also on Windham Hill, I think, was, do you remember Tuck and Patty?
Yeah. Patty and Tuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Tuck and Patty, Patty and Tuck. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember seeing them, and yeah, Tuck was really just an unfathomably great guitar player, and so I got really into Tuck too for a while there. Like he on all those records, he has at least one or two solo tunes. But if anybody out there wants to have their mind blown, you should find his. I think it's from 1989. His Reckless Precision solo guitar album. It's like solo archtop. But he was the first guy that when he was playing solo jazz guitar, it didn't sound like, just went into a restaurant and it was like one long intro to, How High the Moon or something, or Moonlight in Vermont. It sounded like, he would play like Santana's Europa or something, or he would play like Body and Soul, but it would be like with a James Brown groove or something. And
Wow.
that's an
Yeah.
unbelievable record. Yeah.
Very cool.
Anyway.
This is probably where I would say, and you've got your first Martin when, but I have to give Spoon a little spoiler. I don't know that that's going to happen on this program.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, well,
was
you
just
said
gonna-
Martins and more. I'm the more.
Yeah, this is the more.
That's
This
right.
is the more. I was just going to throw in. Kotke told me once that the first time he met Tuck, when they went to shake hands, he started squeezing his hands to make sure there were bones in it.
Oh,
Because
wow.
he said the guy's like a squid when he plays. But
Oh, that's
but,
funny.
yeah.
Yeah.
very, very unique player, to be sure, as you are as well. So I mean, so there's been a lot of years from the time you heard Alex DeGrassi until you got up to the point that you were in Fretboard Journal and all that. So
Yeah.
did you get hot and heavy into I want to be a performing musician right away at a young age, or how did that come about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good question. Yeah. I mean, it's been a long and winding road, like most people. I mean, I think being eclectic has its ups and downs. I've been sort of all over the place. And when I, like in the early 90s, I moved to San Francisco and I was playing a lot of sort of jazz and jazz adjacent music. I had like a 9-piece band there where we were doing a lot of like the funkier Grant Green stuff with like organs and bass and drums and horns and stuff. And that was when I was just finishing up playing electric guitar. I mentioned earlier that I stopped playing electric guitar completely in probably 1998 when my first daughter was born. And I think it was right then that I went back. I decided to just go full-time acoustic. For a variety of reasons, one of which was I was a new dad and coming home at 3:30 in the morning, which when I think of electric guitar playing, I just think of it like it's an ensemble instrument. It's like, and to this day, if I do an acoustic gig, even if I'm touring, I'm back at the hotel by like 9:30, But anyway, yeah, once I got into acoustic, it just seemed like I'd sort of like, oh yeah, this is really, if I boil down all these interests, this is my central kind of thing. And I think that's sometimes advice I'll give, to students or young musicians is like, it's so easy to kind of pick up all the shiny objects in the road and I am eclectic. I know, I realize I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but the more you can kind of pare it down and get some focus and realize that you just can't do all of these things and just have that kind of moment on the mountain and kind of figure out like what is my voice or what am I hearing or what brings almost all of my history to the table. And for me, it was the steel string guitar. And as soon as I did that and I started playing like kind of fingerstyle jazz pieces, but, kind of influenced by it definitely was not influenced by the Windham Hill thing. Like I wasn't doing open tunings, but I think just playing fingerstyle and not like, I don't know how to describe it, but I guess playing a little bit more pianoistically. Like if you guys are into jazz or whatever, like when I think of solo jazz guitar, I always think like big block chords all played at the same time. And I was, trying to kind of play in a little bit more of a flowy style. But as soon as I did that, it just seemed like things came together. Like shortly thereafter that, I got to sign to a small, now defunct jazz label, and kind of got the tail end of the music business. So that really helps, right? Because then, even though, ultimately, like everybody else, you get ripped off. But the one thing that record companies do well is typically is get your name out there and stuff. So they were responsible in early days, like around 2000, for getting me into, record stores and a little bit of touring and stuff, but also just being in guitar magazines, music magazines in general and stuff. And I think that's when I started to maybe get some traction, in that world.
I know you have recorded and performed in recent years with various other musicians, not just guitarists, mandolinists, and so forth. But when did you start to focus more on the duet thing, or is it that people invite you to come play with them? Do you invite, who comes up with this idea of we should collaborate and put our chemistry together?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think at some point, like playing solo, I mean, I still do it, and I probably will do it more in the future, but I did burn out on it a little bit. It's kind of a lot. I like to joke when that first record came out, and I would go, the first time I did like a live radio show, like was public. It was a public radio. I think it was an NPR affiliate, and here in Portland actually, and they had the show, and it was an hour long, and I went on. And I remember this just so clearly, right? I'm like, okay, you're on, play something, So I'm supposed to play for an hour, on live radio, and I'm playing and I'm playing and playing, and I'm, I'm nervous and I'm sweating bullets, and it just, I look up the clock and it'd been like 3 minutes. I'm like, wow, this is, and that's what solo guitar is like, So playing with somebody else it's just nice because of that interaction and but also it's just nice to be able to kind of not lean on somebody else, but just, I don't know, there's just more to it. And so I'm trying to think, like the first time I did it, I guess professionally, or, on record, was probably that June Apple record with Tim Connell in 2015, which is interesting. That record's really had legs. Like I get a lot of positive feedback from that still, like almost more than anything, which is kind of interesting. And that was also kind of my first jump into, playing traditional fiddle tunes and stuff, which I think for people who knew me as playing just like solo jazz guitar and stuff, they're like, wow, what are you smoking in Oregon? Like this is a really big left turn. But
exactly,
to me, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, there are 32 bar tunes where you play the head. It's bookended by the head at the beginning and the end, and there's improvisation in the middle, and it's, and in my case, it's the same instrument. So to me, it's very similar. I just did another podcast last week. Focused on this one record by David Greer and Todd Phillips and Matt Flinner, called Flinner, Greer, and Phillips. It's an amazing record, you guys. It's from 1999. And that was a real game changer. I think I was still living in San Francisco. I realize I'm digressing, but you can hopefully reel me back in. But I was teaching then, and I had a student who wanted to learn Blackberry Blossom. I think that was it. And of course the answer is always like, oh sure, I know it. Of course I didn't. And I started, and I sort of knew a little bit about that style of music. I had the Tone Poems record with Tony Rice and Dave Grisman, so I go down to Amoeba Music in Haight-Ashbury, and I get a whole bunch of bluegrass records because I got to figure this shit out, by like whatever it is, Tuesday. And they just happen to have that record, that Phillips Greer and Flinner record, just on display. It was probably brand new, and it was maybe like a staff pick, and had a cool orange cover. And I'm like, I'll take this one too. And that record was probably record number 2 after Alex DeGrassi's Slow Circle, where again put it on and felt different things moving and changing forever in my brain. That guy is an unbelievably great musician. I almost said guitar player, but it definitely transcends that. Just a great player, and that's such a great album. And I think that got me thinking, like, I got to learn more about this music, so that was in 99. So that's 26 years ago now. Wow. Okay.
Jeez.
Anyway, so I started just doing a deep dive into that music, into his playing, and obviously people like Tony Rice and Doc Watson, Norman Blake in particular. I never copied any of that. I've never been like a lightning fast player. I don't pretend to be, like the best flat picker in the world, but I like that music, and that's so reeling myself back in. That I think that's where the whole Tim Connell thing kind of came into shape, because I sort of knew of Tim, and I don't remember how, but he lived not far from here, and he's a great mandolin player. But he also didn't know anything about that world. Like he didn't grow up playing mandolin in the parking lots at bluegrass shows. His records at that time were just Brazilian choro music. Although I do think he got his degree at the New England Conservatory of Music in Irish music. So he's kind of an interesting little hybrid, right? I'm like, you're perfect for my bluegrass project. Because, I love the idea of just someone from the outside of that world kind of getting interested and just seeing what's going to happen, right? Just want to avoid any kind of cliches of certain styles, right? Just little tunes and stuff. And so let's see when this guy plays it, what's going to bubble up,
You're often playing in, well, not necessarily in unison, but in terms of playing exactly the same time and over an entire tune, like coming back to that and doing those phrasing together and stuff. That's a lot more difficult to do than a lot of people realize, particularly if you're somebody who's used to playing by yourself. So, but you guys just seem to be in such sync. So I'm always curious to know, did you record the whole thing live, or did you guys lay down tracks and have time to say, I got to do that again?
I have great question. And yeah, thanks for that. It's a great question. I can tell you listening to that. And yeah, a lot of the main themes at the beginning and the end, we had worked out. I wrote a lot of that stuff out. And Tim's an unbelievably fast learner. Like I would learn these tunes, it would take me forever, and I would write them out, it would take forever, and then I would kind of memorize it would take forever, and then Tim would be like, show me that, and 15 minutes later it's like, okay, let's go. I think that's from the Irish music thing. He just has that amazing ear. So we went in the studio kind of knowing how we were going to play the main melodies, and we might have decided, let's do kind of octave unison or harmony or stuff. And a lot of that's Tim, like he can just do harmonies right on the spot. And then whatever happened in the middle is whatever happened in the middle. It's just all improv. But to actually answer the question, it's definitely all live. Every album I've ever made has been no overdubbing or punching in or anything like that. Partly because that's just the kind of record that I like. I like to hear interaction, and you can't, one guy record the tracks in Nashville and the other, and then send them to California. I mean, that is a great way to make a record. It's just a different way to make a record, but you can't have that interaction, right? And it's sort of like this. I don't know, the sound of people listening. You can hear that. I think. And so, I've always been on that limited budget thing. And I just love that idea of just really getting ready to go in the studio and then just boom, like try to knock it out in one day. So I think almost every record I've made has been all in one day.
Wow.
And just do a giant dump of all that stuff. That one was hard. It's the last time I'd recorded it, an album to 2-inch tape. And I remember I only rented one spool, so you would get 33 minutes on, 33 minutes off.
Wow.
So that was a really long day.
Well,
But we would record everything like 2 or 3 times. And so I would take, the best parts of each one, or in most cases, just take one, choose whichever one was best. But interestingly, and actually really kind of importantly, I think in my own history is at the same time, just a few, I wouldn't say weeks, it was probably months later, I recorded another duo album, which it couldn't be more different. And a really important experience in my life, which was my record with Mark Goldenberg called Artifact. And Mark, if you guys don't know, he's so behind the
We
scenes,
both-
people don't know.
yeah, we know, but Maury and I both know him because I grew up a huge David Lindley fan, and Maury grew up a big Jackson Browne fan, so we know Mark very well. But yeah.
He is just such an astonishingly great guitar player. And so we had a couple of years there where we were really playing a lot together, and it was very important to me. So a real mentor. Of course, some people might know he played with Jackson Browne for like 16 years, and so we'd play like a little club, and Jackson would come, and I remember I was sort of backstage, if that's the right word. It was kind of like a restaurant with a listening room, so I was like, back where they keep all the wine, and with my guitar, and then it's just me and Jackson for a while, and he comes because he's a guitar nerd, right? So he wants to come back and check out my Santa Cruz or whatever, and we're talking, and we're just talking about Mark, and I was telling him I feel like I'm Luke Skywalker, and I'm on the, I've gone down to that little planet, and I'm just hanging out with Yoda for a little while. And
That's great.
he's like, yeah, man. He's like, I know, I get it. Yeah, because Mark's a deep guy, and that Artifact record was such an amazing experience because even though I have recorded all my albums in more or less one day, and like I said, we would do, multiple takes, and sometimes there were really long days. When I recorded that thing with Mark, we just each went to the studio. I flew down to LA, and we recorded it in Hollywood at a really nice room that he got. He produced that record, and I brought 4 pieces of paper, 4 tunes that I'd written, and he had 4, and we put them on a music stand in front of us, put 2 U87s in front of us, and hit record. And that whole thing is just one continuous take. And we're just improvising it. And I don't say that like to boast. I just it's still kind of amazing. Like somewhere in the middle of it, I'm like, wow, we're just like getting through this thing. And it's really Mark. There's something about his, he's just he doesn't know how, if you look him up on AllMusic, like all of the movies and television shows and all the giant artists he's played with, it's just amazing. So he's a lifelong session guy. And there's that certain energy where we're just sitting there and you're making a record, but it feels like you're just looking in the fridge in the middle of the night for something to eat. It's like it's a very low blood pressure kind of experience, and it just
wow.
I always tell people it's really hard to play like it doesn't matter when it does, and some people just have it as a kind of a superpower, and he really does, and it apparently it's sort of contagious. And somewhere around like noon, we were just sitting in a taqueria, and he's like, well, all right, we're done. And I flew home, and then I came back about 5 minutes later. I hadn't heard it, and just listened to the whole thing, and it was just there. It was just really cool. Wow. Now, whether it's good or not is subjective. It's a long, weird ride. It's not.
Oh, it's good.
It's not. It's not jazz music. It's not fiddle music. It's just us taking turns, playing that music. Anyway, that was a great experience, and then since then we've been playing with Jamie Stillway, who very similarly, just has that great energy and just amazing listener, amazing player, and all of that. And I just love that thing with 2 people. I always thought if I started my own record company, I would just call it Duo Records or something and just have duos, because some of my favorite albums, like in the jazz world, like those Bill Evans and Jim Hall records, like just give me goosebumps every time. And I've heard those records 200,000 times. And or in the fiddle sort of world, there's plenty of them. But I've obviously a tone poem record with the first one with Tony Rice. Like that's a goosebump moment. There's, I could go on, but there's something about duos. I think when you get that third person in there, it's possible, but it becomes exponentially harder to have this thing where it could just go in a whole different direction at a moment's notice or something. But with two people, it's easy for it to kind of ebb and flow and get intertwined in a different way. And actually, in this past few weeks, I've been playing a lot with my friend Scott Law, who maybe you guys don't know, but he's someone you could all look up, who's an unbelievably great guitar player here in town, and also someone with a signature model from the Santa Cruz Guitar Company. Coincidentally, we only live a couple miles apart. It's really funny, but him and I have been playing jazz again. Like I really kind of took a break, about a 5-year break from jazz, but him and I have been playing jazz together. We're going to do a gig in April, I think, and I'm kind of looking forward to that. And it also has that similar kind of deep listening kind of vibe that I'm always shooting for.
Well, when you say that, one of the things early on that really blew me away when it came to guitar players, when you're a kid, you get out, like you said, you're listening to the local popular music at the time, which for me was Dylan and the Beatles, and then I heard George Barnes and Bucky Pizzarelli. And then that got me into George Barnes with Carl Kress and that same kind of thing. And that's one of the things that I was, when you said that you just did that first record live, that your time is just so exquisite when you're playing with other people. And there again, I mean, there's a lot, when you listen to Buena Vista Social Club, almost every one of those songs is almost twice as fast by the time they finish. But you have that sort of George Barnes jazz man's, sense of time and playing time, which a lot of people completely take for granted because it's to have it, now second nature like you do. So that's really cool. So you guys you think you're going to put out a record together?
Oh, I don't know about that. I know we're going to do a gig in April, and we're going to take it. Yeah, we'll just take. Yeah, I don't. That's as far as we gotten. Right now, it's about every other week. He comes over real early in the morning. I make a fire and coffee, and we just go through the set list of all these cool old tunes. Been playing like a lot of Miles Davis and but he's been kind of bringing some cooler tunes that I hadn't played before, like some like Keith Jarrett and stuff like that. So on 2 acoustic guitars. So, yeah, I don't know where it's going, but it's been
wow. That's very cool. Speaking of Miles Davis, talking about Impressive Records, tell me about your Miles Davis project and how did that come about?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I just circling back for a second. I really appreciate your comment about the time because that is probably the most important thing to me. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd like to think what you said is 100% accurate. I mean, or it's what you said is accurate, but or true. I struggle with my time too. I just put it at the top of my list, and when things are on, then hopefully I'm living up to what it is you just said. But it is really important. And what I usually tell students, tell people that it's just really about not letting go of it, not, and trying to pay attention. But that is something I worked on, and early on I didn't have that. I'm going back to like in the 80s. I had this really pivotal experience. Remind me that where you asked me about Miles Davis, but this is going to be a little bit of a detour. But you just made me just brought up like a really interesting memory, and I think it was somewhere in the mid 80s. I don't remember how this came to be. Someone said, "Do you want to come and try out for this band?" And these older cats, right? And I was playing electric guitar, and I don't even remember what we were playing. I just remember like I was going to try out for this band, and I was playing with these guys, and I was doing like ripping guitar solos, like playing electric lead guitar or whatever. And I remember leaving there like, yeah, man, like they don't know what hit them, and then like, and the phone didn't ring, and then finally when I made that call, they're like, yeah, man, that was really great. Like, we really took some great solos, but both the bass player and the drummer said that you were kind of rushing and a little all over the place with the time, and so I'm sorry, but we got to give this job to somebody else. And I'm like, oh yeah, like that. You need to have those moments, and at the time they don't feel so good, but you look back like I do now, and I'm like, oh, thank God, because that's how you get. It's kind of like my first marriage. I'm so happy to be in my second one now. But that's a bigger digression. But yeah, so I think from that moment on, I started really kind of focusing more on time and trying to get a good pocket, and that's something I preach to people. Like, it's music is only as good as it feels. So anyway, digression over. Back to Miles Davis. So yeah, I think in 2012, I think I was going to make another solo jazz guitar record, and I was working on a bunch of standards, and I think I was going to do, I don't know, I'm probably making this up, one of those tunes, like maybe So What or something from the Kind of Blue album. And somewhere working on it, I had the epiphany that I should just play that whole album. And so I just kind of at the 11th hour, like I'm about a month and a half from going in the studio, I just changed gears. I'm like, I'm going to just try to play the whole Miles Davis Kind of Blue record from start to finish. Not like learn all the parts and everything, but just improvise, just kind of make up my own stuff. But I had to, work out the heads and stuff and figure out how I was going to do it. And I usually get all in on stuff. I mean, I've always loved that record. I mean, that's a not a big surprise. Everyone does, but it's just, it still gives me goosebumps to listen to that record. So a lot of going back, listening to that record, but also reading books, understanding a little bit how it was recorded and where those, I find it particularly fascinating. And there was a book, I can't remember what it was called now, but it really talked a lot about the history of those guys going into it, and especially with like Cannonball Adderley, but all of them really, like, at that point, if you were a jazz musician, maybe, we're just playing Autumn Leaves and stuff. Like, everything you played was these 32 bar AABA tunes with tons of chords in them. And then here you got in there, and I want to say Miles Davis, probably Bill Evans, but that's controversial, probably came up to him and said, like, no, this tune's like 16 bars of D minor, and then we're going to go to E flat minor and then back to D minor. And I'm sure to them that was just, mind blowing. Like, what do you mean we're just going to play one chord, for, or if you listen to flamenco sketches, really Bill gave them a piece of paper with 5 different scales on them. One of them was like the Phrygian scale and whatever. And I don't think all of them would have recognized it as that. They would have just thought of it as a collection of notes, like whatever, And the idea was like, you're just going to play on each one for a little bit, and then we're going to like have a cue and go to the next guy. But this sort of open-ended, wide open landscape was just, it must have been just crazy talk to these guys, And of course now, as this author had explained, like it's, probably led to like, the Grateful Dead and, just like so much of what music can be, Pink Floyd, and just sort of things that are open-ended. But at that time it was so structured and stuff. So it's interesting to like maybe know that and listen to something like So What, and you can hear how, they're figuring out what to do and finding their way through that tune. But also you can hear like Coltrane's confidence when he comes through with the saxophone. I still just get goosebumps, like, 'cause I know what to do here, but yeah, that's just an amazing moment. So reading about that album and listening to that album, and then I went in and I took 2 days to record that. I recorded it all in one straight shot, and then I went back the next day and did the same thing, and then chose from there. And yeah, that record was kind of a game changer for me. I think got into more magazines and stuff. I know Guitar Player magazine did a big thing on it and stuff, and I started touring more around that a little bit. I think in 2013 I figured out when I did my taxes, I bought 65 plane tickets or something that year. So it was definitely busier. And I had a little life of it. I think what was really cool was I ended up meeting Miles Davis's son, and he really liked the record, and he sent me some of his dad's original mono vinyl. Were on my doorstep one morning, which was really sweet.
Wow.
So yeah, for a little while there, I was kind of like the guy that plays these Miles Davis records. I'm sure I'd cringe if I heard it now, but sometimes I feel like maybe doing it again, just to be totally different.
Oh, wow. Certainly.
I know
certainly.
the second Fretboard Journal Summit in San Diego was the one and only time I think that Jason I think thought of it. He's like, why don't you come down here and that could be your set. You just play the whole thing, So I did that, and no one seemed to throw anything at me.
What did you record that album with? What instrument or instruments?
Well, it would have been my signature model from the Santa Cruz Guitar Company. I'm trying to think if that was the first record I had that for. And I think the answer is yes. I think because that guitar, they started manufacturing that. I think that debuted at NAMM 2011. So yeah, I guess that would have been the sort of debut. And then since then, it's the only thing I used.
Yeah, timing wise, I was wondering if that might be the case, but.
Yeah, and before that, some of I think the record before that, I had a very similar model that was sort of a predecessor to the signature model. And then, fun fact, before that, I was like a Taylor guitar artist, and I had a bunch of custom guitars they had made me that I used on some of my earlier records, which are now out of print, and maybe for good reason, but. Yeah, but the Santa Cruz guitar kind of I think that was the first record I did that one on.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about how you got hooked up with that. I've always been Martin-centric. For my ear, that's kind of the Goldilocks just right for me. But when people always ask me about this, first thing I say is Santa Cruz, and there's something about that, the sound of the Santa Cruz, the meat in the low mids and all that is Martin-esque. But what Hoover and McAllister were doing certainly was it's its own thing. But of all of the Santa Cruz, their 12 fret, their slope shoulder models, particularly the 12 fret 00 size, has always been typically become my favorite Santa Cruz guitars when I play them. So how did you come about to end up with a signature model that was a 00 size but a deeper body, and what was the evolution of this guitar? How did you guys come together to make this instrument?
Yeah, I feel the same way, and I do think that, I think that the original Santa Cruz guitar, they are dreadnoughts and they are OMs, and Richard was definitely, like everybody else, was very influenced by Martin guitars. I think if he was here, he would probably say that, he just wanted to make his own Martin guitar because maybe he couldn't afford to make one. And like a lot of guitar builders at the time, that was the steel string he copied. And so a lot of those early models are definitely just, Martin style dreadnoughts or whatever. Like I said, I was playing Taylor guitars for a while, and I just, I got into the world of Santa Cruz up close and personal because literally I was playing guitar at Griffin Guitar Store in Palo Alto in probably, I don't even know, 2009 or something like that. And Willie Carter, who was working at Santa Cruz Guitar Company and doing like artist relations and stuff, just happened to be there, and I happened to be playing like an OM that I was trying out there, and it was really great. He's like, "Oh, do you play Santa Cruz?" I'm like, "No, but I'd like to." And I had friends that had Santa Cruz, and he said, "Well, if you're going to be in town, you should come by and meet Richard or whatever." And I went by and met, and we just became fast friends and stuff. And I started playing Santa Cruz there, and I bought a couple guitars because they offered like an artist kind of situation or whatever, and I really wasn't playing that many small guitars before that, but I ordered a 00 because I always thought I wanted one, and when they made me a 00, it was like kind of their standard 00, but I think I ordered Adirondack top, because normally it would have been like Sitka or something. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else custom about it. I think that was it. And when I got it home, it was just so amazing, and so loud. I remember thinking, I'm going to get this little guitar. It'll be like my couch guitar. And my wife is like, you can't play that on the couch. Like, I can't think. It's so loud. And so that was my main guitar. And I used that, I think, on one of my records, like the Slow Moving Dog record with bass and drums or whatever. And yeah, Richard just called me up one day. I remember I was walking my kids to school and just said, we think we'd like to do a signature model guitar with you, like based on this double O. And I was just like, that was pretty exciting news, right? And so we went back and forth and talked about things that we would do. Now having had played that sort of more or less stock double O 12 fret for, I don't know, maybe a year at that point, if I'm making that up. Like, what would I do differently now was basically the question I kept asking myself, and then talking with Richard about it. And so a couple things were, do you know John Grevin?
Yeah,
Builder John Grevin?
Of them, yeah.
John used to live a couple miles from me here in Portland. We have a lot of great builders here in Portland, by the way. You may or may not know. Jeffrey Elliott in the classical world, I would argue maybe the most important, American classical guitar builder. Yeah, lives a couple miles down the street. Great guy, too. We like to drink beer together. Anyway, where was I going? Yeah, John Grevin had a personal instrument made of Cocobolo and the 24.9-inch scale. And I think it was a triple O. And I really love that guitar. And John's a great flat picker, by the way. So we used to play flat picking tune once in a while, and I would use that guitar, and I thought it was great. So that was a little bit of an influence. That's how we got to Cocobolo. And Richard, being the amazing guy, he said, it can be anything you want, So I'm like, okay, well, it's going to be Cocobolo. And then the red spruce top, or Adirondack top. And then I did think I wanted to go a little wider on the string spacing. So it's 1 13/16. I think previously I was playing 1 3/4, which is like a little bit of a nebulous term, right? Because that doesn't really tell you like necessarily that's how wide the nut is. I mean, you can space the string slightly differently in there, and of course the neck can be narrower or wider, but gives you an idea of what you're looking at, right? Whereas when the right hand, if I'm not mistaken, and you probably know more than I do, the bridge spacing is, using digital calipers from the center of the first string to the center of the sixth string, and that's a more precise thing. So that's 2 1/4. Although I've had one of these guitars made at 2 5/16, and that's really nice too. But so that's a little bit wider than the normal 2 3/8 that they were doing. So playing around with scale length and string spacing and just this like funny little guitar nerd stuff, but getting it just right, made it sort of in my mind, kind of a greatest hits thing for that extra space in the left hand. I think allows me to play more complex chord voicings that have a mixture of fretted notes and open strings, perhaps even up the neck a little bit, and play those more cleanly. So a lot of times people will pick up a wider neck guitar, including myself, and at first, your first feel is like, oh, this is kind of a lot. I'd rather play a Telecaster or something, but and maybe I would too. But the problem is, to play more complex chords cleanly, like that extra space is just important. So that's just something that I believe in. And then the neck shape is kind of like a soft V, but definitely a V. It's not a C. Not too round, because I do like something that kind of feels like my thumb is on there, and then same thing with the right hand, like sometimes going really wide. I've had Taylor had made me something. I'm trying to think what would really be really wide. 3 3/8 that's really wide. 2 3/8 or something like that. And then because I do like to flat pick and finger pick, like that was a little bit of a trek from one string to another for me personally when I was flat picking. Although maybe now I would appreciate that because I seem to be getting sloppier as I get older. So a little more space is good. I don't know. Finding that sweet spot with string spacing is the one place where I do, at the time got pretty nutty, and I haven't changed my opinions about any of that. And then one last thing, and then I mean to cut you off there, but the scale length really is important. I mean, we were talking like 1/16 of an inch longer than like say the Gibson scale length, but that and correct me if I'm wrong, the old Martin scale or the standard old school Martin scale 24/9 really is kind of that sweet spot. It's just like that sixth string is just that skosh tighter, and it just has, just like a little bit more of a strong fundamental, and not, it doesn't quite go to that county line with the floppy thing sometimes with a lighter string.
And that's important. You say you don't typically go with the alternate tunings, but that's really important. If you're going to try to play in Celtic tunings and stuff, you can end up with really flabby strings if you're not careful when you got a short scale. Yeah, now it does make sense since you do as much flat picking as you do fingerstyle. But a lot of people go with the wider spacing at first because you can get away with more with your picking hand when you have the 2 and 5/16 or 2 3/8. So it's interesting that your guitar has the wider nut, but it has the more of the hybrid 2 1/4 spacing that was supposed to kind of split the difference between the old wide Martin spacing and the skinny modern Martin spacing when people started using 2 1/4. So it's interesting. You have the wider nut, but still the relatively narrower spacing. And I can't think of another guitar for sale out there that I know of that actually has that combination. So having not seen one of your signature models, I'm really curious to see what it feels like. But
yeah, I mean, so you can imagine it's less of a fanning effect, right? That's a little bit more of a straight line or between the relationship between the strings. Because sometimes you'll see a guitar that's 2 and 5/16, but it has a 1 and 11/16 nut, and so you can see those strings just start to spread out around the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th fret. But yeah, and then I do sometimes use open tunings, like on that Kind of Blue record. Sometimes the sixth string is tuned down to C. I think on All Blues and maybe Flamenco Sketches, if I'm not mistaken. So sometimes I will do things with the bass strings. But I'll usually just grab a heavy set of strings, like literally a heavy, like a 59, and put it on there. If I'm in the studio, I'll just put it on for one tune, and that'll tighten things right back up again. Yeah,
certainly. Very Lindy thing to do, but yes.
Back in those days, I used to only use 13s on that guitar anyway. Like I only played mediums. And just in the past 5 or 6 years, as I've my hands are kind of like an old boxer now. My hands are kind of getting older and stuff. So I've switched to like gauge strings, like 12 to 53 or whatever. But
so you've had your signature model for some time. You've been a recording artist for a very long time, and you have mentioned before that you are very interested in the recording process, and particularly the mixing and mastering of albums, and you are now helping other people who are sending you their material, and certainly a lot of solo guitarists and people who are making their own records usually end up mastering everything themselves, and other people will say, the best thing you can do is let somebody else help you with that that's got a lot of experience. So what are you actually offering to people, or what kind of material are you receiving and mixing and mastering to a certain degree?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I do really love working with audio, and of the 9 records that I've released with my name on them, I've had a hand in some of that for every one of them. I've always at least sort of co-mixed, co-produced, and the last few, the ones with Jamie Stillway, I definitely did all the mixing and all of that. So it's something I really love to do. And in recent years, I find that I really love to work with other people's stuff. I find it really satisfying. So yeah, lately I've been more public about people who, like you said, maybe have recorded something at home, but want somebody to help with that final sweetening and finishing and getting it ready for prime time. Maybe it could be a single or an album that's going to be released, or maybe it could be just something they're going to put on social media, a video. I do work with video a lot. And I'm someone that really kind of enjoys working with that kind of thing. I have a couple album projects that I'm working on this spring. I have a singer-songwriter here in Portland Going to actually track that here in my house. So I'm working on setting up a space to do that. I have another young man out on the East Coast who's a flat-picking guitar player, and I'm just sort of working with him online about how to get the best capture, the most neutral capture, and actually really just sort of producing from afar, like talking about like how to really get ready to record and actually how to record, and really thinking about like arrangements and getting your your music together, and then with the ultimate goal of like then sending me all the files and I'll go through them and then getting them sweetened, I guess we'll say, or finished. So
Awesome.
Very cool. Very cool indeed. Yes, we can all use help with that. When I go to Martin and record the new models for One Man's Guitar, pre-COVID, I used to be able to be in their sound room, which was really helpful, where they did all their R&D stuff. Since then, they stick me in the museum, which is a big echo, and I tried to do 3 mics with a big diaphragm mic a little farther away, but it was also during the cold snap, and they wouldn't turn the AC off because they were afraid it was going to freeze up on the roof.
Oh yeah.
So they left the AC on, so that greatly changed the sound of this year's new Martins. But so I was left with 2 small diaphragms. But consequently, I may need to send you an email about how can I get more volume out of what I recorded without hearing the air conditioner overwhelming everything. But you might just be, it's a good thing you stopped by.
Yeah, that's the sort of delicate thing. And I think that's hopefully, where I can be of help to people, because if someone has done it for a long time, and I think I'm at the place where I feel like I know what it should sound like. And I think where a lot of people, more and more people are recording at home, and which is great. There's a lot of great things about that. There's a couple downfalls to that, even production-wise, because like I've said earlier when we were talking about how I've made my albums and done it all in one day, and I would really get ready to go to the studio. Sometimes if it could just, having a deadline is a really big deal. That's always been a good thing for me. So the one sort of potential downside to recording at home is if you can just sort of work on it at your leisure, don't be surprised if months and years go by and you haven't done really much of anything at all. But when you sort of limit yourself and you have a deadline, it can really be a great thing. So usually when I'm producing someone from afar, I'm like, let's pick a date certain and let's talk about how you get ready for that date certain, and otherwise it can become this big nebulous mess. But then the other thing that I was getting to a second ago was I feel pretty confident that I know what it should sound like, and know how to get it there. And I think that's maybe what I'm offering, because I think it's when I was first starting and doing this stuff, what a mastering engineer for me was, or an older mixing engineer, was this trusted set of ears. Like, I think I've got it right. I think I'm hearing compression. I think, is this too much reverb? Is it not? Is it too wide? Is it too narrow? And yes, these things are subjective, and there's no exact right answer. We all listen to records and think, I would have done this differently. But to get it in the ballpark of what is acceptable as a professional quality thing that a radio station would play, or a magazine reviewer wouldn't be like, I don't know. But to get it up to that last 10%, a lot of it is just experience, and so that's a big part of it.
Well, how can our viewers find out more about where and how to do that?
Well, yeah, sure. You can go to my website, www.ericskye.com, ERICSKYE. And from there, there's links to, teaching. I think there's one called production, and someone could reach out. And, I've done things as little as an Instagram post. This woman last week sent me, she had a Weizenborn. You know what that is? I'm sure you do.
Oh, yeah.
But she had a harp. You know what a harp guitar is, right? With all the big giant extra strings, and sometimes they'll have a little bit extra strings. She had a harp Weizenborn, and which was an amazing thing. And she had made this little video of herself playing on it. She's a killer player, and but she's like, I don't know, like, is this ready for prime time or whatever? So could you just kind of do a final mix and master on it? I mean, it was just a mono recording, so it's not really mixing. It's just sort of, sweetening and finishing. And I had run it through like a tube compressor and EQ, and kind of got it up to volume or whatever. And she's really happy. But the point is, I think it was just something she was going to put on Instagram, and it was, so no job too small, actually, I really love the little jobs. Yeah, you can get through to me on my website. I'm not hard to find. You can Google me. You might see some
Nice.
FBI stuff or IRS stuff, but I'm easy to find.
We'll put a lot in the show notes too. So
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah.
not the FBI, but the other stuff.
Yeah, right.
So we have a ritual that we put people through here called 20 questions, and normally it's where one of us, either the smart guy who's Maury or the wise guy who's me, thinks up a Martin guitar that is available for sale in the world today, and the other person gets 20 questions in which to guess what that was. They have to be yes and no questions, and then 3 of those questions can be guessing models. So, Eric Skye, are you willing to come on camera for 20 questions?
Wow, I predict failure, but I'm going to go ahead and try this.
Modest man, a modest man. Okay,
I'm not a Martin player, and I haven't bought a guitar like in 20 years, but I will give it a shot.
Okay, so, all right, so here we have Spoon thinking of a Martin guitar that's available in the world today, and you have 20 questions on the clock now.
Oh, I thought you were going to, I'm sorry. Let's start over again. I thought you were going to ask me the questions, and I was going to narrow it down. I was saying, so I got to think of the guitar. Oh,
That's
okay.
correct.
I need a minute then.
You take a minute, because I have to let the cat in before she crawls through the door.
Or do you want to be the one who thinks of the guitar? That might be easier.
Yeah, I want to do that. Yeah.
Okay,
You
good.
quiz me.
Okay.
You quiz me. Show
All
me
right.
how.
Yes, is this guitar made in Nazareth, Pennsylvania?
Presumably, yes.
Okay. Can be made in Mexico, but if it's one of the big models, it's made in Nazareth.
Okay.
Is this guitar does it have the dreadnought body size?
Yes.
Does this guitar have mahogany back and sides?
Yes.
Is this guitar a D18?
Yes. Is it
My
too
record
easy?
still stands.
Too easy. That's
All
good
right,
though.
I mean, all I saw,
No, that's fine. No, there's times I've tried real easy guitars because Maury is going to assume I'm coming up with some tricky one, and it'll be a very simple one, and he'll just go right. We've done that to each other.
All right. Well, I got to get going, but man, you guys, this has been a lot of fun.
Yes, it has.
Almost
Thank you very
ours,
much
yeah.
for joining us. Yeah, absolutely. Great. So,
From all of us at
looking
Martins
forward
and
to-
More. From all of us at
I was gonna
Martins
say,
and
yeah.
More.
Looking forward to hearing what you have coming up. So when you start putting out, more music. So all right, talk to you soon.
From all of us at Martins and More.
Thanks for listening.
Hear you later.